Hello everyone and welcome back to Genie Crafts. Today's video is the second video in the pet portrait series, and today we are going to take a look at a very different kind of halftone portrait, which is a symbol based halftone portrait, where I have cut almost over 2000 small minute rectangles to achieve that result. So guys, without any further ado, let's get started and see how this kind of portrait is made. I have covered the template generation process in a separate video which I'll be launching a few days after this video. So guys, let's get started now. So the template for this kind of portrait will consist of symbols in different sizes, small and big. So as you can see on the template consists of only rectangles and a square, which was my chosen symbol. But you can utilize multiple symbols. You can utilize a heart shape, a star shape, or any shape that the template generator provides you. And the symbols will be of different sizes. For darker areas the symbols will be bigger, for lighter areas the symbols will be smaller. And the blade that I'm going to utilize for this particular paper cutting is OLFA paper cutting knife. You can also use DAFA knife because that also has a very small blade. Now this is a very precise paper cutting, so you do require a knife on which you have better control. So normally the paper cutting knives with shorter blades have better control, so it would be best if you use such kind of knife. So as you can see, I have removed one square which is at the starting point at the top, and now there are multiple ways in which you can approach such kind of portrait. The normal approach that I take is a kind of assembly line approach, where I make cuts in one direction first and then I do cuts in the other direction. Now in this kind of portrait there are horizontal cuts and there are vertical cuts. So the approach that I took was that first I did all the horizontal cuts and then I did all the vertical cuts. So initially I'm going to show you how to do one line. Now as you can see that I'm not dragging my blade at all. I'm just putting pressure on the paper and cutting the desired distance. Now that's a technique of paper cutting which is utilized for very minute areas or small areas. It ensures that you're not over cutting or you're not accidentally cutting into an area where you're not supposed to cut. So this kind of enables you a better control. Now you utilize this kind of cutting technique also when you are cutting fonts or texts or out of paper, or very intricate designs out of paper. For the bigger rectangles which come a little bit later, you can drag your blade slightly, but you have to be very careful because as you can see that for the smaller rectangles there is still some gap between the two squares or between the two rows and columns of the symbols. But as you go towards the darker areas of the portrait or denser areas of the portrait, you will see that the distance and the gap between the two symbols will be very less, so the margin of error will be very minute. So you have to be very careful how you approach this kind of cutting, and the technique has to be proper because there is very less margin of error, like I said before also. Another thing you need to be careful of is how you take out the cutout pieces, because pieces being so minute, there will always be chances that they remain stuck as the corners, so you do not pull them out. Initially you will be able to, but as you keep on removing the squares, your paper is going to become very fragile and very intricate, and if you try to pull something out, you might tear off the other parts of the paper. So you have to be very careful how you take out the pieces. So I use the first row to show you how to do the cutting of the squares. I will talk more about as we reach into more denser areas, but what you see right now is a time lapse of doing one directional cut. So I am making cut at the top and bottom of the rectangles in the different rows, and I did this with the rest of the portrait before I moved to the vertical cuts. So we are almost 1/5 of the portrait done in one direction, and this is how it looks from the back. You can see the top and bottom edges of the rectangles cut. Only the left and right portions of the edges are not cut, which will actually remove the pieces of paper from the portrait, but I will not start on them until I have done this top and bottom thing for the remaining portrait. And now we are entering into the more darker areas of the portrait, so let me talk a little bit about technique there also. Now this is a close-up of the portrait. You might feel that there is sufficient gap between the rows because it is so zoomed in, but actually the gap between the rows was very less, especially for the darker areas of the portrait. And you can see how slowly I am doing the cut. I'm ensuring that I am doing no overcutting on either of the edges, the top or the bottom, or I'm not going beyond any corner of the top border and the bottom border. And it's important because uh, still there is some gap column wise, but there is very little gap row wise, so you have to be very precise, because when you cut the vertical directions, your previous cuts act kind of as a guiding line for you, and you won't remember what distance you cut for what symbol or what square, right? Because since you are doing assembly style cutting, so in that case you have to be precise, so that later on when you come back to this same portion of the portrait to actually remove the squares and the pieces of paper, you know exactly where to do the vertical cuts. So it's important that you have to be precise. No hurry at all. Do not drag your blade in a hurry. You will definitely overcut. If you're not comfortable dragging the blade on such small pieces of paper, use the pressure style cutting, which I talked about earlier. You put the tip of the blade, you apply the pressure, then you move your blade again till where you have cut. You again put the tip of the blade and apply the pressure and move it again. So that's how you achieve a very precise cutting. So I did rest of the cutting in one direction of the camera, and you can see the cuts on the paper from top to bottom for the top and the bottom borders of the squares and the rectangle. And now it's time to remove the rectangles from the portrait so that the actual image can start coming out. Now, as you saw earlier, I moved in one direction. I started from the top and I ended at the bottom. You have to do it similarly for the other direction also. You choose one direction and then you move in that direction. Once again, I will move from top to bottom, but it also depends upon whether you are right-handed or left-handed. If you are right-handed, you move from left to right. If you are left-handed, you move from right to left. The reason being, when you are right-handed and you apply pressure from the knife, you basically drag the paper on right hand side of your hand slightly. The stress on the paper on the right hand side of your hand is more than the paper that is on the left hand side of your right hand. So in that case, it's best to move from left to right, and vice versa for the left hand also. It will ensure that you do not accidentally stretch and kind of break your paper. And trust me, I know this. I have done experiment on this. Being a right-handed person, I know the best way to approach intricate paper cutting is moving from left direction to right direction. From the perspective of cutting, from the perspective of portrait, we are moving from top to bottom. It was more from an aesthetic and photography point of view, but you can choose to move from bottom to top also. Whatever suits you better, you can move in that direction. But when you are cutting, you should move from left to right only. Now as you cut, keep removing those small pieces of paper. Sometimes you can directly flick from the tip of your blade also, but other times you might have to carefully remove it. Do not wait for a lot of cutting to be done and then removing the paper, because at times those pieces can come under your portrait and create a double layer of paper which might hinder your cutting. So it's important that you keep removing those small pieces of paper as you go along. Now if you had to be careful when you were cutting the darker parts of the portrait where the symbols were bigger, you have to be even more, almost double careful when you approach the other side of the cut, when you approach the vertical cuts and you reach the darker portions of the portrait, because there are two cuts on each of the symbols already made, and now you have to ensure that you are cutting in the exact same spot where it is required, so that you do not overcut or accidentally cut that small gap uh, between the two rows. And you can see that how slowly I am going, and this is exactly how slow you also have to go if you do not want any kind of mistakes. Another reason you have to be even more careful is because of the cuts that you have made in one direction. Your paper becomes very fragile because there are a lot of cuts in the paper. It becomes very flexible, very fragile. So when you drag your blade, it stretches the paper. So keep your fingers on the paper nearby to ensure that the paper is not undergoing unnecessary stress, and when you cut it doesn't stretch and tear off. So be careful when you are doing the cuts in the other direction. Now you might say that I could just cut each line by line. That's your choice, you can cut each line by line, but the benefit of doing cuts in one direction first is that it's way more faster. If you are doing cuts line by line, then you'll have to keep rotating your paper again and again, which consumes a lot of time, and the result will be still same. Your paper might get more dirty because you are rotating your paper again and again on your mat. So these factors come into play, but you'll still get your portrait, but it will consume more time for sure. So follow these tips and tricks and continue this process of cutting, and slowly your portrait will emerge. It is going to take a lot of time because there will be a lot of rectangles. The better the resolution of your portrait, more symbols you have to cut. The lower the resolution, less symbols you have to cut. And this portrait was medium resolution only. If I had gone for higher resolution, it would have taken much more time. It took me almost a week to finish this, doing like an hour or so every day. So overall I think it took me over 10-12 hours to finish this, but the end result was well worth it. As you can see, now I'm at the end of the portrait. When you are at the end of the portrait, please be very careful, very cautious, because we tend to make mistakes at the end only. If you do everything properly, the end result is going to be well worth it, and you are definitely going to like it, and it is very good from a framing perspective also. The best part is that you can choose any colored background for it. You can make it a pink cat, you can make it a brown cat, black cat, yellow cat, green cat, whatever colored cat you want to make. So that's the best part of halftone portraits, that you can choose any background color. So guys, I hope you guys liked this video, you guys enjoyed it. If you guys found this video useful, please do not forget to hit the like button and share this video with your friends, and do subscribe to my channel for regular videos on different forms of arts. And I will see you guys very soon in my next video. Till then, stay safe, take care, and bye bye.